Hello everyone and welcome to this regional workshop. My personal compliments and greetings to all participants. My name is Fuad Mirzayev. I am a team lead of the TB treatment team in the Global Tuberculosis Program in WHO headquarters in Geneva. Today I am not there with you, unfortunately, but in this virtual presentation, I will provide you an overview of WHO Consolidated Guidelines on TB treatment and care, and my colleagues who will be there in person during this workshop will provide more details. Over the past 60 years or so, TB treatment has undergone significant advancements, evolving from no medication to combination therapies that may or may not include injections. Treatments have progressed from being minimally effective, toxic, lengthy, and burdensome for patients and the healthcare system to safer, shorter, and more effective options, including for drug-resistant TB. With the shortest regimen now being a 4-month course of treatment for drug-susceptible TB. The medications used in TB treatment include both those specifically developed for TB and other antibiotics that have been found effective and repurposed for TB management. While we have made great strides, the journey continues. Challenges like high medication costs, treatment duration, and safety remain, opening the door for exciting future innovations to create more accessible, efficient, and safer solutions. On this slide, you can see a snapshot of all the updates and publications released by the WHO Global Tuberculosis Program in the last 3.5 years. Drug-susceptible TB Consolidated Guidelines presented several new treatment recommendations. The new TB Care Guidelines and the Handbook were released in 2022. Childhood TB guidelines incorporated all recommendations relevant to younger patients in the release back in 2021. And finally, drug-resistant TB guidelines that were released in December 2022 with a major update have been again updated in early 2025. So this year, WHO is releasing a new edition of the Consolidated Guidelines on TB treatment that combines all 3 current modules, the module on drug-susceptible TB, the one on TB care and support, and drug-resistant TB into one consolidated online resource. The part on the drug-resistant TB has also been updated. So let me run through each chapter of the Consolidated Guidelines. Chapter 1 is dedicated to the treatment of drug-susceptible TB. This part of the consolidated document will not present any significant updates compared to the previous version from 2022. The drug-susceptible TB guidelines were already rehauled and updated, also consolidating recommendations from 2010 and 2017 guidelines. Since the establishment of the current global standard of care for TB, the 6-month HRZE regimen, widely used for most TB patients, treatment guidelines for drug-susceptible TB have remained largely unchanged. A significant update came in 2022 with the introduction of 2 new 4-month long regimen recommendations tailored for adults but also for children and adolescents. Beyond this, the guidelines primarily reflect a consolidation of the previous recommendations, also setting the stage for the future advancement. Back in 2022, WHO also released the TB care and support guidelines and the updated handbook. There are no changes in this chapter for this release of consolidated guidelines. The chapter on TB care and support prioritizes patient-centered care by incorporating recommendations that focus on care and support interventions tailored for all individuals with TB, ensuring their unique needs are met. There is also a part on specialized models of care designed specifically for people with drug-resistant TB, also addressing their distinct challenges. And finally, the models of care for children and adolescents, providing age-appropriate support to improve outcomes. The Chapter 2 on treatment of drug-resistant TB is the one that will see a major update. It was already announced in August last year in the rapid communication document. The updated guidelines with all the details and the handbook are being included in the release of the consolidated guidelines this year. This chapter introduces several key updates while retaining many previous recommendations. The updates are highlighted in red on these slides. A major policy addition back in 2022 was the 6-month BPAL-M regimen for patients with multi-drug resistant and rifampicin-resistant tuberculosis, including those with potential additional resistance to fluoroquinolones. This year, the chapter also introduces an alternative 6-month regimen and several modified and optimized 9-month regimens. Furthermore, it provides new recommendations on the potential co-administration of treatments for drug-resistant TB alongside modern therapies for hepatitis C. So let me just run through the main recommendations in this chapter. The game-changing new regimen reviewed and recommended back in 2022 is the so-called BPAL-M regimen, which combines several novel and repurposed medicaments and can be used in patients suffering from both multi-drug resistant and rifampicin resistant TB and those with additional resistance to quinolones. Unknown safety of using the new agent, pretomanid, in patients below 14 years of age prevented recommendation to expand to all patients, leaving this unfortunate limitation until ongoing safety studies are complete. With the BPAL-M recommendation following the guidelines released in 2022, the framework of drug-resistant TB treatment has evolved as follows. The BPAL-M regimen became the regimen of choice, followed by 9-month regimens when specific limitations arise, with longer 18-month regimens reserved as a last resort for individualized treatment plans. Last year, the new evidence was kindly shared with WHO and used for the review and guidelines development, originated from 2 clinical trials. BTB trial that studied a new 6-month regimen against standard of care 9-month regimen in South Africa, and the multi-country NTB trial that studied 5 new modified 9-month regimens, comparing them to the longer 18-month regimens. The research question that was used for the guidelines development was very much aligned with the BTB trial, and it is as on this slide, it was whether this regimen, a 6-month regimen with bedaquiline, delamanid and linezolid, with or without addition of levofloxacin or clofazimine, be used in patients with pulmonary rifampicin resistant TB with or without quinolone resistance when compared to the currently recommended 9-month regimen. The review of this new evidence from the Beat Tuberculosis trial resulted in this new recommendation for the so-called BDLLC regimen and opened up an opportunity for younger patients to benefit from the shorter 6-month regimens as well. In the same manner, the second research question that was put forward for the review by the guideline development group was very much aligned with the research question of the NTB trial. And it was whether the 9-month NTB trial regimens, there were 5 of them, can be used in patients with pulmonary rifampicin-resistant TB, but those without quinolone resistance over the currently recommended longer regimens. The outcomes of this review of the second question were 2 recommendations. Why 2? Because the first one is a positive recommendation that supports the use of 3 out of 5, 3 of the researched 9-month modified regimens, and as a more lighter and more streamlined alternative to the currently recommended 9-month regimen consisting of 7 drugs. 2 of the regimens researched under the NTB trial are recommended against the use based on the evidence provided by the trial. That's why there is a second negative recommendation. These several new recommendations and a number of the new regimens, the paradigm of drug-resistant TB treatment is changing with new regimens included in the 6-month and 9-month groups. An important highlight is that the 6-month regimens are now available for most of the patients of all ages. Well, now the new recommendations are in place. But there are still several implementation barriers to make them available to all patients needing treatment in all affected countries. Of course, that includes the diagnostic barriers, the high price of some medicines like Delamanid. The medicines availability and procurement is still an issue in some places, but there are quite a number of programmatic barriers, like programs having the doubts about these new innovative regimens. There are still previous regimens in use. The regulatory in countries are not totally catching up with this change, and policy updates or repeated local research. Now, can we say that we are in the best place possible with the treatments for drugs susceptible and drug-resistant TB? No. The journey of TB treatment is far from over, and the future looks promising. While current TB treatments are not yet perfect, the field is vibrant with ongoing research into better regimens. We are optimistic that both current and upcoming trials will pave the way for even safer, more effective, and shorter regimen options, transforming the landscape of TB care. To provide a bit of summary of what I said, the shorter 6-month BPAL-M regimen is the regimen of choice for patients with multi-drug resistant TB, TB with rifampicin resistance, and also with additional resistance to quinolones, but can be used in those of 14 years of age or older. The 6-month regimen research under the Beat Tuberculosis trial is a 6-month alternative for those not eligible for BPAL-M, and it can be used in all patients, including children and pregnant women. Several modified 9-month regimens can also be used for patients with multi-drug resistant TB, but without quinolone resistance, adding a choice of regimens with fewer component medicines to the group of 9-month regimens, including those currently recommended. The longer 18 or 20-month regimens remain the last resort individualized regimens. And obviously, the duration of drug-resistant TB treatment can be the same as the treatment for drug-susceptible TB, now for most of the patients, including children and during pregnancy. And finally, before we have a discussion and answer questions, let me say that in 2025, there is a consolidation of several guidelines and handbooks in Module 4 treatment. For drug-susceptible TB, we have 3 regimens, 2 shorter 4-month regimens and 1 6-month regimen that remains recommended. For drug-resistant TB, there are 7 shorter treatment regimens. 2 of them are 6-month, the BPAL-M and BDLL-C. There are 3 new modified 9-month regimens and 2 previously recommended. The longer 18 to 20-month regimens remain the last resort option and the only individualized regimen that is possible.